What's going on, folks? If you've been following the channel, you know I love to drop in on the OC Poetry community where I'm a mod, react candidly to poems I come across, give you my feedback as a literary editor, um, as a poet myself, and just offer some insight and perspective wherever I can. Usually I sort by new and I just kind of react to whatever I find. I love to look at poems tagged up with the workshop flair. But we're going to do something a little bit differently today, and we're going to, instead of sorting by new, we're going to sort by top. And I wanted to show that there's kind of this natural contrast in terms of what Reddit, what kind of popular poems people want to upvote and highlight. I think it's just really interesting to kind of compare and contrast what that is. And it's a nice change of pace. You guys know I tend to read and react to poetry from a kind of a craft perspective, from a technical perspective. I'm looking at poetry as literature. And you'll see that's going to be a little bit difficult to do when we're looking at poems like this. And let's unpack why that is. This is by Super Sad Lesbian. I just looked for poems in the past month here. To my uncle who took me home at 3 a.m. It's a great title, a really great title to really situate the reader really quickly that there's this intervention. Took me home. So where is the speaker at 3 a.m.? We know they're probably somewhere not good. I was already awake when you came to my door, but instead of throwing it open or flashing the light switch or shouting from a different room, 5 gentle knocks made their way to my ears. Are you awake? So they're doing a lot of work, I would say redundant work. They're spending a lot of syllables, a lot of lines to situate the reader, what doubtlessly could be done more economically. But I think a lot of people upvoting this don't really care about that much. They don't care that the craft is sort of, rough and ready. What they're interested in is the sentiment and the story. They like the fact that this poem is narrating easily for them. The fact that it takes a long time to kind of get to the story doesn't really bother this reader. In fact, that might add to their interest because they want to know the story. And the fact that it unravels slowly, kind of this shaggy dog story, kind of actually enhances it for them. And I wanted to tell you that I value you for respecting me, but that's difficult to articulate at 3 a.m. or any other time. So instead I say, yeah, and I start getting ready to go. So again, there's kind of a little bit of sentimentality in this, aw shucksness. But it presents this kind of, a little bit of opportunity for upvoting to affirm their own beliefs, that they're good people in the world, that everybody's deserving of respect and all this stuff. And it's also an opportunity to show that we care for someone else online, that there's some total stranger who we've never met, who went through something difficult. We want to show like you're part of our human family. I think that there's a role for poetry there. Okay, so let's look at the next. Alcoholism a disease, not a choice, or this is what you're doing to your children when you drink, mom. So again, we have this really, really beefy title. People, I would expect, might be tempted to upvote this without even reading the poem because it's a sentiment they agree with. So strictly speaking, when you're upvoting or downvoting, you're kind of voting. And if your eye is going through a lot of stuff quickly, you might just vote based on, affirmation of your values. So the statement, alcoholism is a disease, not a choice, feels like this bold statement and something that naturally we want to agree with, right? And it kind of aligns with these other kind of proximate values about, a lot of different stuff, right? And that's attractive to us as upvoters to make the world a better place. Upvoting doesn't really make the world a better place, really, but we all fall into that trap of wanting to do something, anything to make things a little bit better, right? Mel, would you please cut the light? Let mom stumble up the stairs. It seems she's on the sauce again, so if she falls, who cares? There's the thud and stumble too. Didn't hear her crack her head. Let's go pick up her pieces and get her into bed. So the very, very simple, easy metrical and rhyme scheme that this uses. So light here actually doesn't really rhyme with anything. Stairs, cares, again. And then head, bed, pieces, and two don't rhyme. So it's kind of, relatively facile, and almost like kind of Dr. Seussian kind of rhythm to it. But that doesn't necessarily make it ineffective, because the goal, or the highly upvoted poem, its goal is kind of to attract a lot of eyeballs, to bring a lot of people in, and to not deter readers. So it's kind of creating a bigger boat, a bigger platform for folks. So again, just because this doesn't resonate with me, and I find this to be kind of a blunt force instrument, that doesn't mean that it's not appealing to a lot of other people. Again, I do think a lot of the work here is just done by the time the title is done. Whether people read the rest of this or see the rest of this as kind of evidence backing up the claim of the title, I'm not sure. I think were we to read some of these comments, you're going to see a lot of stuff that doesn't really comment on the specifics of the poem at all. And really, none of the lines of the poem are something that people are connecting to. Instead, they transition immediately to their own experiences. And it really allows people to think about themselves while they read an upvote, right? Which is ultimately what people want out of the highly upvoted poem. Okay. Well, the other thing that I would say, which is interesting about both of these poems, is they're both really about these difficult or traumatic situations. They show a kind of radical vulnerability that perhaps using an anonymous pseudonym enables them or empowers them to do this, to put these things out there. And us as people, as upvoters, we upvote because we want to show our sympathy and our kind of, things are going to get better, we're all here for you type of sentiment. And really what we're talking about is we're talking about trauma. We're talking about poetry that confronts and deals with trauma. That's what's attracting attention and upvotes here. Either because we as people, when we see someone hurting, we want to run to find out why they're hurting and help them, or because we want to find a way an easy way to create a better world by supporting people, right? So we're going to look at one or two more here. We have 10 things I could write in a video game review that I could write in my suicide letter. So again, Reddit is going to be a community which has a lot of gamers, a lot of people familiar with video game tropes. And this poet then is going to be able to leverage that to do something that isn't strictly speaking kind of a poem, although there's nothing against making a list. A list is called a litany. There's nothing wrong with making a list, but we're going to see that the language isn't particularly attenuated in a deliberate poetical way. I'm sorry I couldn't make it through to the end. I found myself lost from the start. So again, there's not a lot of specifics there, but I think people find that funny, so it draws them in. I wish more tips and hints were available whenever I ventured the wrong path. I think this is creating this dichotomy of kind of right and wrong, which might be true in a video game, but I'm not sure is as true in real life. I found myself unable to cope with the challenges that stood in front of me, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this I think is a way for the writer to kind of attract sympathy and attract upvotes. Like, please, ultimately people are saying like, you shouldn't kill yourself, right? I mean, that's probably a lot of these upvotes are saying, please, man, things are going to get better if you're feeling this way. Right. And I would agree, please don't kill yourself. And if people who post, and if you're thinking about posting poems about suicide, I would urge you, instead of posting poems about suicide, to call a suicide hotline and engage with someone who is available 24/7 to help you feel better about yourself. I kind of feel like poems about suicide end up can create suicidal ideation in others. So I think there's a certain amount of risk that when we upvote suicide poems, we're going to end up with more suicide poems, which I think would be not a good thing, because ultimately the more suicide poems, the more that becomes potentially kind of glamorized. And if that leads to even one person to attempt, let alone one person to succeed, I think we're not helping one another. We're not making the world a better place. So that inclination to upvote and support other people is, unfortunately, the algo kind of is manipulating us, right? So we have another one, Dear Suicide. And again, I'm not going to read this poem because, again, I don't want to validate and I don't want to raise and platform suicidal ideation. I want people to know now is the time to stop listening to this video and call a suicide hotline if that's what you're thinking about. Again, we're going to get another one. We're going to get another poem. Dead flowers on the dining room table. I want to be dead flowers. I want to be dead. I mean, so it's another poem of suicidal ideation. And again, taking this together, we have some poems about trauma, and then we have a slew of poems about suicide. And we have to ask ourselves, I think, as a community, how do we most effectively channel and work together to deal with difficult situations, traumatic experiences, and move forward? And of course, as a champion of craft, as someone who thinks the art of poetry can ennoble us and help us gain access to the deepest complexities and reaches of other people's imaginations, I also want to say craft might not be the most relevant tool to help people, and poetry is not always the solution to every problem. Poetry is ultimately very important and significant to me, and I'm sure it's very important and significant to you if you're listening to it. But I think we have to identify the bigger issue in this room is social media, and social media is not necessarily helping people live their best lives when it's elevating a lot of these psychological problems, particularly suicide, in a way that I find not particularly constructive and not particularly helpful. And shame on Reddit, and shame on the people who are making literally billions of dollars off other people's pain and suffering. I also do want to say there are other approaches. I'm not an expert in either lived trauma. I certainly have had traumatic experiences, as almost every person on planet Earth has. I'm not an expert in either lived trauma or in how to write trauma. But fortunately, the poetry community is big and does have experts in that area. Recently, I did an interview with Elizabeth Blair, who wrote this book, Because God Loves the Wasp, which is about her own experience in an institutionalized setting and the trauma that she experienced there. And this book is not a cry for help and a cry for upvotes. This book is literature, is a transmutation of her experiences of these difficulties into art. That's not to say that anyone else trying to do this, I'm not going to judge whether other people succeed or fail this art. But I do think Elizabeth Blair has dedicated decades and decades of her life studying the craft, meticulously learning from other master poets on how to approach and how to write and how to elevate her own experiences into something that can potentially make a very big impact on how we understand trauma, how we approach trauma, and how we heal from it. And these are, I think, the voices that get left out sometimes when we're looking at Reddit poetry. And we're not able to correctly onboard them because we kind of get siloed a little bit in our own worlds, which is natural, especially when we need help. We tend to put on our blinders and just think, help, help me, help me, help me. So I'm really interested in figuring out your ideas and your suggestions about how to improve the OC poetry community and make it a platform where expertise is more baked in, and we're able to help people who need help, or say, this just isn't the right place for us. We can't help the suicidal on a poetry subreddit. We should be steering them towards subreddits, or not to subreddits, to suicide hotlines where this help is there. And maybe we should think very carefully about the types of poems that we upvote. And we should be respectful to people who are dealing with traumatic experiences. But we should understand that upvoting, as well-intentioned as it is, isn't helping anyone. Thank you so much for joining me. And please do stay tuned for the Elizabeth Blair interview that is landing right now. Thank you.